Good afternoon and welcome to the Community Development Block Grant Application Writing Workshop. I'm Katie Easterly Marte, the Executive Director of the Community Development Finance Authority. Today's agenda will allow us to cover a number of items. We'll first start with welcome introductions. We'll do a brief overview of the Community Development Finance Authority and the balance of funding availability that we have at CDFA. We'll then do a deep dive into the Community Development Block Grant Program, including eligible activities, the threshold criteria, and the evaluation and scoring. We hope that this information prepares you to submit an application. The next round of applications are due on January 25th at 4 o'clock. We'll answer any questions that you have, and I just ask that you put those questions in the chat as we go along, and our staff are monitoring that chat, and we'll be sure that we answer those throughout the presentation. At this workshop, we will not be discussing the CDBG CV funds. We will discuss those at future workshops when new funding rounds for the CDBG CV are announced. To kick things off, we want to hear from you via the chat function. Please type your name and organization that you represent so we can develop an attendance list. Again, if you have questions throughout the presentation, please put them in the chat and our staff will be monitoring that throughout the presentation. If you'd like to raise your hand, then use the raise your hand function that's part of this online platform, and we'll allow you, by unmuting you, to ask your question. So as you all put your names and organization in the chat, I'm just going to get started with an overview of CDFA. We want to be sure to give you comprehensive information, but also are hoping to have this workshop completed by 4 o'clock. So let's get started. CDFA's mission is to maximize the value and the impact of community development, economic development, and clean energy initiatives across the Granite State. We see a future New Hampshire in which communities are economically and socially resilient, respect and reflect their natural surroundings, and are places where people want to live, work, and play. We work to align CDFA's resources to meet the evolving community and economic development needs of the communities across New Hampshire. We do this work in accordance to our values of integrity, prioritizing collaboration, striving to be adaptable to changing needs and issues, respecting people in place, and making focused investments that promote prosperity for all. CDFA deploys a number of resources, including grants, loans, and tax credit equity. We look to provide technical assistance across all of our funding resources to ensure that you have information about how to apply and how to be successful with the funds that you're awarded. CDFA's resources span a funding ecosystem. That ecosystem starts with supporting concept initiation with the pre-development support that we provide through technical assistance, our eye-to-eye program that's a convening and often a competition for funds to advance that idea, and our L5 capacity building program, which is a subset of our tax credit program, and we have upcoming workshops on that program. In planning and development, we look to support our project sponsors as they go through the planning phases, as they advance architectural and engineering work, as they bring their project forward to their local community for approval, and as they develop plans for how to ensure that their project meets the needs of their organization, both for their sustainability needs, the goals the project has, and we have some energy products, including an energy audit program that will allow you to really understand the energy needs of the building or renovation that you propose. And then the balance of our funds, really the majority of the funding that we award on an annual basis is in that implementation piece of our ecosystem. So that's our community development block grants, the tax credit program, our clean energy fund, and the community development fund. To ensure you have information to advance the community economic development project, we look to engage with you. And one of the major areas of engagement is our collection and production of data on an annual basis. For the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2020, CDFA invested nearly $18 million in grants, tax credit equity, and loans into dozens of New Hampshire's communities. These investments supported 109 different projects, affecting nearly 180,000 people. This map shows all of the areas in which those projects touched down, and they resulted in new and renovated housing, new jobs, stronger small businesses, more efficient, comfortable, and resilient buildings, and significant energy savings. In many cases, these investments are built on CDFA's investment in previous years, with our grantees increasing their capacity to take on new and bigger projects. Here are some specific examples of CDFA's investments around the state. CDFA invested community development block grants into the Twin Pines housing project called Tracy Community Housing. The City of Lebanon, so the community development block grants always go through a municipal grantee. So in this case, the City of Lebanon, and they were awarded a CDBG grant of $400,000 to support Twin Pines Housing Trust to develop affordable housing on Tracy Street in downtown Lebanon. The housing had easy access to transportation, was on an economic corridor, and was close to community facilities. The project created a 3-story net zero project with 29 housing units. 100% of those units were available to low and moderate income people. This built on previous investments that CDFA had made to Twin Pines, including a $29,000 award of L5 capacity building grants to support strategic planning, and a $200,000 loan to enable the organization to develop plans for a community center at a different project. After the investment of that loan, we actually invested tax credit allocation to allow for the construction of that community center. In addition, we're investing in critical infrastructure, and this infrastructure often propels economic development and housing development across the state. The redevelopment of the River District in downtown Littleton is an example of that work. It's a public-private partnership that brought together state and federal resources plus the local community to achieve a vision of really activating the river as part of the downtown development of Littleton. If you know Littleton, you know that the main street is booming with small shops, eateries, and the riverfront had historically been pretty cut off from that downtown. And so this infrastructure project was designed to really enhance the connection between Main Street and the river and ensure that people could use the recreational assets and the economic development assets of the river. The tax credit, we provided a tax credit award to support the River District, including the trails, a permanent home for the regional farmers market, parking, and other infrastructure. That was our most recent award. And prior to that, it was a community development block grant award for the rebuilding of the water and sewer infrastructure. The construction photos here in the left are part of that project. We often find ways to leverage various CDFA resources as part of one project. So the two previous examples were where we, in phases, invested funds into an area or an organization, but we also often can find ways to actually leverage resources into one project. So one example is Maple Manor. It's an independent housing complex in Newport, New Hampshire. It provides high quality housing for low-income elders and disabled people. This project combined a community development block grant with clean energy funds, and it helps Maple Manor to add insulation, new heat pumps, hot water heaters, energy efficient LED lights, and rooftop solar panels to help them lower the operating costs. The building was more comfortable and again had lower operating costs into the future. We've responded to several new challenges and opportunities over the last couple of years. We were partnered with the Governor's Office and United Way to advance the Recovery Friendly Workplace Initiative. to reduce the stigma of substance use and really ensure that all New Hampshire residents have access to employment that supports them in recovery. We also worked with federal and state partners to better understand and to ensure that the state could take advantage of the Opportunity Zone program. And in addition, we most recently helped with New Hampshire Charitable Foundation and the Center for Nonprofits to deploy nearly $40 million as part of the Gopher's Office for Emergency Relief and Recovery to support nonprofits across the state. In addition, we do have the Community Development Block Grant CV funds, coronavirus funds, and we're looking to advance those funds to support efforts to respond and recover from the coronavirus. And we will, as I said, have workshops in the next couple of months as we announce those new funding opportunities for those funds. We work together with our municipal and our nonprofit partners to respond to these new challenges and are always looking to step by step together in that work to ensure that these challenges are met with the appropriate resources. At this point, we're going to dive right into the Community Development Block Grant Program and start with that program overview. I'll pause just for a second to ensure that staff can tell me if there's any questions we should be answering at this time.
Hi, Katie, it's Melissa. There's no questions in the chat currently.
All right. Again, please feel free to put them in there at any time, but we'll dive right in. And then if we identify questions, we'll pause at that point and be sure that we get your question answered. So the Community Development Finance Authority administers approximately $9.2 million of community development block grant funds. And these funds come from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And they're to be granted to eligible municipalities to support the development of viable, sustainable, and equitable communities by expanding economic opportunities for persons of low and moderate income people. There's a number of areas in which these funds are invested, and we'll talk about each of those areas today. CDFA's administered the annual allocation of federal CDBG funds on behalf of the state since 2003. And since 2003, we've coordinated the investment of more than $150 million into New Hampshire's communities. These critical resources have been deployed across the state and made significant impacts in economic development, housing, and community-based projects in dozens of municipalities. Before we jump into the program overview, I want to review the resources that CDFA has developed to assist our partners so that they can easily access program-related information and materials. You can both find all of the information that we discussed today and dive actually even deeper into this information on this resource website. So if you go to CDFA's main webpage, and then up in the right-hand corner, you'll see the area that's highlighted on this slide, which is called the resource website. And in that resource website, you'll find each of those program areas in the ecosystem, and you'll find in-depth information in terms of eligibility, use of funds, and any requirements for how those funds are utilized. With the CDBG program, there are federal requirements for the use of funds, and information about those federal requirements is on this resource hub. In addition to written materials, you'll find webinars, which are videos, and you can watch it at your convenience. So I'd really encourage you to go to the top right corner of CDFA's website or by visiting resources.nhcdfa.org to look at those materials. And obviously, always reach out to us. The staff are here to help and guide you as you navigate those materials and identify how the resources can help in the project you envision for your community. So the resource hub, in terms of the areas of information, has information on the pre-development phase, so that's the workshops, and also information on how to get in touch with staff and various requirements, so that's under that pre-application area of the website. And then in the application, that's really what we're going to go over today. So the information in the application part really mirrors this presentation. And then in the implementation section, then that's where you'll find additional information once you're awarded the grant funds, how you utilize those funds and ensure you're meeting, in this case, the federal and state requirements of the Community Development Block Grant Program. CDBG was established by Congress to address unique community development needs. It's a flexible program in terms of the vastness of the eligible activities. It was established under the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974. It's a formula grant provided to entitlement communities and states on an annual basis. So HUD receives a total allocation through the THUD bill and then establishes an investment into entitlements and states on an annual basis based on a mathematical formula. The primary statutory objectives of CDBG are to develop viable communities, provide decent housing and a suitable living environment, and to expand opportunities, particularly for persons of low and moderate income. Awards are made to municipalities. They're often then sub-granted to a subrecipient who's a non or a for-profit carrying out the activity. The grantees, the municipal grantees who are eligible to apply are all New Hampshire counties and New Hampshire cities or towns except for entitlement communities. In New Hampshire, the entitlement communities are Manchester, Nashua, Portsmouth, Rochester, and Dover. If your project is in one of those communities but serves a balance of people from the county, your project may be eligible under a county application, but you should really talk with the staff to find out more about the requirements for any projects in an entitlement community. CDBG is broken up into two areas. As I said, the entitlement program, so that's cities, and then the state program. Entitlement communities receive funds directly from the Housing and Urban Development, and the state administered CDBG program are for all the places other than the entitlements. Nationwide, on average, entitlement communities receive 70% of the funds allocated for the CDBG program, and 30% goes to state-run small cities programs such as ours. In New Hampshire, because we're a rural state, by and large, there's a smaller number of entitlements than the state funding. So in New Hampshire, of the total funding, CDBG funding that comes to New Hampshire, 77% is administered by CDFA for the balance of state, and 33% is invested in the entitlement communities. CDFA's 2020 action plan, so that's the plan that really describes how our funding is invested, and we do develop that plan with public input, and we have public hearings to receive that input. And it allocates funds across three major categories in 2020. Housing with 30% of the allocation, public facilities with 30% of the allocation, and economic development with 30% of the allocation. This is in addition to $500,000 in emergency that's set aside for emergency funds, $300,000 for planning grants, and the remainder is used for administration and technical assistance, 3%. So we talked a little bit about how the funds flow. So they start at the Department of Housing and Urban Development with that THUD allocation. They then come to CDFA as the administrator of the Balance of State program. After the competitive round, if you're successful at an award, we contract with the grantee, the municipality, and they contract with a subrecipient often if they're not carrying out the activity themselves. And then the subrecipient carries out activities that benefit low and moderate income people. They are the people at the end here, and they're considered beneficiaries in the CDBG program. In any given year, a municipality, county, or city and town, other than entitlements, can apply for all of these funding. So they can apply for housing funds, housing grants, up to $500,000, public facilities up to $500,000, economic development up to $500,000, planning grants and emergency grants. There's no limit on planning grants. So essentially a municipality could receive approximately $2 million. And because we are administering the CDBG CV funds right now in response to the coronavirus, I'll just note that any award of CDBG CV funds do not count against these funding limits. It's important that all community development projects are aligned with a community-based strategy. So in terms of aligning with that community-based strategy, we're wanting to our subrecipients and municipalities to be asking themselves questions as they're putting together community development projects. Looking at data, and again, CDFA does pull together data, 13 different indicators, which we'll talk about in a little bit, for all municipalities across the state, as well as community needs, different plans, and really to identify what are the economic and community opportunities that you're trying to capitalize on with this project? Or what are the, what are you really trying to, what are the challenges that you're trying to address with this project? And how does the project meet those needs and and opportunities? Is there community support for the project? And how does it fit into the regional and statewide plans? It's great for the local projects to really be aligned with the local, the regional, and the statewide strategies for community development and economic development. So those parts are all working together. When you're planning to apply for CDBG funds, it's important to think through your project, as I just said, from the community perspective, and also to think through how are you going to take that next step of writing an application. So you have an opportunity to work with three different options. The municipality itself could write the application and administer it. You could consult with a consulting grant writer. That's a private company, a private individual who writes applications on behalf of municipalities. Or you could partner with your regional planning commission as a quasi-governmental agency. It will the grant writer and ultimately administrator, if you're funded, of the grant funds will play an important role from the beginning to end of your project. It will, they are experienced in grant writing and grant administration and can help answer your questions, ensure that your project has a good plan for meeting the compliance requirements, and really ensure that your project's successful as you use the CDBG funds to advance the project you're planning for. Subrecipients may write applications, but they are not able to administer the grant. So once if the project is funded through the competitive round, once it moves to that administration phase, then the subrecipient is not able to administer their own grant. CDFA is a resource to applicants throughout the grant process, both the grant writing and the project implementation. I want to just give you a snapshot of the steps that are taken to award funds to the CDBG project. This includes a comprehensive review of your application. So you start with really learning about the CDBG program, and that's this workshop. We also encourage you to have pre-application meetings with CDFA staff. You likely then are engaging with a grant writer, and the municipality, the grantee, is submitting the application for funding on the grants management system no later than the deadline for that round of funding. CDFA staff then review the application that you've submitted, and we score that application against other applications for funding in that same round. We take a summary of our recommendation to the Community Development Advisory Committee for their consideration. The Community Development Advisory Committee is made up of stakeholders across the state, municipal officials and community members, and they make a recommendation to CDFA's board of directors for approval of the funds. Once you're approved by the board, then our staff draft a contract, and that contract is submitted to the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office reviews the contract and submits it to the Administrative Services Department, and it's then placed on the Governor and Council's agenda for review and approval. Once the application is presented to the Governor and Council and approved, then the contract's delivered to the Secretary of State for the Governor's signature, and then the funds are made available to the project. It takes approximately 3 to 6 months to get through this process and make the funds available to the project. So breaking down a couple of the steps, we do encourage, as you saw, one of the first steps is to have that pre-application meeting with CDFA. This meeting will bring together all involved parties. Hopefully it will include the municipality, who's going to be the grantee, the subrecipient, if there is one, the grant writer, and CDFA staff. We're doing these on virtually right now. You can either call the office to request a meeting, you could email the Director of Housing and Community Development, Molly Kaler, or you can request a meeting at the top of CDFA's website where you saw that resource hub button. One of the buttons at the top of that website says request a meeting, and you can request a meeting that way as well. During that meeting, we'll discuss the needs of your community and how your project fits into meeting those needs. We'll review the project details, including the time and the goals. We'll talk to you about other funding sources that are maybe available for your project, either at CDFA or other resources if we know of them, and make those connections. And we'll talk about the required thresholds and documentation for the application to ensure you understand those requirements and don't have any questions as you move through the application writing process. I'll give you some information about the upcoming deadlines. So the planning grants, those are up to $25,000 of funds. We talked about those in the funding ecosystem. Those are the funds that are available to help you study your project, advance the planning or the pre-development aspects of your project. Those are accepted on a rolling basis from January 1st through June 30th. And they're open until funds are expended, fully expended. And at this point, we do have a sufficient number of or amount of funding in that planning grant category. So we'd encourage those of you who have not advanced beyond the planning stage to consider a planning grant application. In addition to our planning grants, our economic development grants are accepted on a rolling basis as well. And those are until funds are expended. And like the planning grant, there are funds available in that round as well. And if you are requesting a pre-application meeting for an economic development project, I'd encourage you to reach out to our Director of Economic Development, Kevin Peterson, and he will be talking about the economic development program in a little while in this presentation. And then the housing and public facilities, those applications are accepted in 2 competitive rounds each year. The next round of applications will be accepted Monday, January 25th at 4 o'clock. There's a little exception this year. So we, with our other partners, New Hampshire Housing and DHHS, we all fall under the same program category from HUD's perspective. We extended our program year this year to June 30th. I think a number of people who have been involved in the CDBG program are aware of this, and it really aligns our funding to the federal allocations. Unfortunately, because there's been significant delay with the federal budgeting process in the last number of years, the awards that we made in the January round, which had previously been our first round of funding in the new year, because we were on a calendar year, were always conditional on that federal award. And it made it difficult for projects who had to wait to hear whether their project could be funded based on based on that federal allocation of funds. So to ensure that we really we're not in that situation and align our calendar with HUD's calendar, we've actually extended that program year to June 30th. So this year, just a one-time thing, this will actually be the third round of funding in this year's round. It's called the second year because it usually is, but it's the third year. So there's a little less funding in that housing and public facilities round than there typically is. There's about $2 million. And it's typically closer to $3 million at this time. But I wouldn't discourage you from applying because of the CDBG CV funds. There might be some flexibility in ensuring that projects are funded. So we know that there will be, that there's $2 million left for this round, nearly $2 million. And we'd really encourage you to consider a project in this upcoming round, which are due January 25th. And we likely, as we go into next year, we'll continue on the cycle of having competitive application rounds for our housing and public facilities at the end of July and end of January. So with that being said, I'm actually going to pass the presentation to our Director of Clean Energy, Scott Mislansky. Scott.
Katie, before we do that, can we pause 1 minute for some questions in the chat? Would you mind?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. So one that I can answer, will you be sending us a copy of the presentation? Yes, you'll be receiving a copy of the presentation as well as links to a variety of other resources to help you through the pre-application and application phase. And some of these questions, Katie, we might defer to the eligibility section coming up, but I just wanted to acknowledge that we have them. We're looking to find out, are there funds available to upgrade an aging water system in a village district, and would a village district be considered a subrecipient? Did you want to defer to the eligibility section, or did you want to answer that now, Katie?
Sorry, I had muted myself and I was struggling a bit to get unmuted. So we have funded village district water system improvements. You do need to meet the low and moderate income requirement, and usually those, the grantee is not the district, but is the municipality. But we can talk through that specifically at a pre-application meeting.
Okay, great. We have another question. Wondering whether long-term boarding type housing falls under housing or public facilities, and is there a time distinction?
Yeah, so interestingly, HUD has just given new guidance for their distinction of whether this is a public facility or a housing project, and it is based on average length of stay. We are finalizing actually what we call a circular. So a circular kind of takes HUD's guidance and aligns it to New Hampshire's program, so it makes sense in New Hampshire's context. So I expect we'll have that out in the next couple of weeks, and that will be available in that application portion of the website of the CDBG program. So in the resource hub, under the CDBG program, under the application, that's where we list all of the circulars, and you'll find one in the next couple of weeks on that question. And we'll also send it out to the grant writers and grant administrators that are on CDFA's grant writer and grant administrator listserv, just to be sure that you have that information as you finalize applications.
Great. So another question regarding whether offices of organizations serving primarily LMI, is there a current match requirement, and does whether the clients access the offices matter versus support offices?
Yes, we are typically not able to fund offices that don't provide direct services. And so you need to provide direct services, and there's not a one-to-one match.
Okay, and a Question about whether, which program would a sidewalk or bike lane project fit under?
So that would be a public facility. So if the community that's looking for the funding is more than 51%, or the service area in which you're proposing the project is made up of more than 51% low and moderate income residents, then you'd be eligible to apply under public facilities. So that's, yeah.
Great, thank you. And then Community Bridges is a nonprofit organization assisting people with disabilities and is looking for funding to renovate our new home office. Do we qualify?
There's some sort of specificity in that question. So we'd encourage you to schedule one of those pre-application meetings. When you actually do request a meeting, it pulls up a questionnaire where you can provide us some information about the project specifically. And what we'll do is we'll pull information that pertains to your project in advance of the meeting, so we can answer your specific questions.
And the last one that I'm seeing in the chat at this time is, if funding issued to the applicant for disbursement as project progresses, or is it a reimbursement to the applicant after the money has been spent?
It can be done either way. So either it's reimbursement, or it can be provided to the grantee, who then pays the, say, contractor at the time in which it's expended.
Great, excellent. That's all I'm seeing for questions right now. I'll be scrolling back to make sure I didn't miss any, but I think we can move on to Scott's portion of the presentation.
Great, thank you, Melissa, and thank you everybody for those questions. They were great, and we'd love to keep answering them. And don't want to discourage you if you had a specific question, but would really encourage you to sign up for one of those pre-application meetings, because it just lets us really dig in. We don't want to tell you it's not eligible, and then if we had a pre-application meeting, we could have dove into the details a little more and found a way that your project would be eligible. So just wanting to give you those general eligibility parameters on this during this presentation. I really encourage you to do a pre-application meeting as the next step. So I'll pass it on to Scott now. We are looking to support you in advancing projects that are sustainable and that really have as low of operating costs as possible. And part of the way we support that is through our energy work. And Scott's the director of clean energy at CDFA, and he'll walk you through some of the resources we have available to support your clean energy goals, and also the energy policy that aligns with our community development block grant program and is a requirement if you're interested in applying for funds. So Scott, the floor is yours.
Great. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. A lot of information coming your way. So I just wanted to say hello. I don't know if you can see my video or not, but hi, everybody. I'm Scott Maslansky, Director of Clean Energy Finance. I know it's helpful sometimes because we all watch so many PowerPoints these days and slides that it's just good to say hello. But I'll take my face off now and give you the presentation. So CDFA, I wanted to share with you a bit about our programs and our energy policy as it relates to your potential application. Oh, can you go back one slide, Katie? Oh, I don't know if you can go back one. Yep. So actually, let's see, back one more. I think it advanced a couple there. There you go. So CDFA, we have several different energy programs, and so I wanted to share some of these resources with you to improve a facility's energy efficiency or add renewable energy. We have our programs support a combination of funding for energy-related analysis, for low-interest financing, and for technical assistance. It helps you build a better project. And I'm always happy to talk with you, whether the funding support is coming from us or we can provide you with other resources available. I'm always happy to discuss the energy side of things with you. So please do contact me about that. Next slide, please. So in 2018, after many years of having some clean energy resources available from a variety of different programs, we pulled together a group of folks, of experts and board members, et cetera, to take a look at our clean energy programming and develop a set of strategies, because we really wanted to bring our clean energy programming more in line with our other programs that we have at CDFA. And so that included trying to increase the number of projects that align with our mission, namely working a lot more with nonprofits. We had done a lot of business solar loans, for example. We wanted to increase the number of multifamily housing related projects, to review our Clean Energy Fund programs with our tax credit and CDBG applicants early in the project's development, and that's why I'm speaking with you today, to use additional CDFA resources to support energy-related studies that could then lead to energy-related upgrades, and that's one of the programs I'll speak to in a moment, and ensure that the projects that we're supporting at CDFA incorporate clean energy objectives and really look at the opportunities that are out there while you're doing the other development work that you're doing. And so that's where our energy policy comes in. Next slide. So one of the programs that's new I wanted to mention is our Community Facilities Energy Assessment Program grants. This just started in this October, and this covers 75% of the cost of an energy-related study, whether it's an energy audit or an energy design charrette, a solar feasibility study, or some structural analysis that would allow you to do other work related to energy. And grantees can then apply to other programming from us or USDA's Community Facilities Direct Loan and Grant Program. So this kind of sets you up for that opportunity as well. And for CDBG applicants, you have the planning grants that were mentioned earlier, up to $25,000, and of course, an energy audit could be part of that scope of work as well. So this is, again, a resource that's available. Not every town will be eligible. It's based on your median household income and population of your community, but we're hoping that some communities can take advantage of this as part of their energy assessment. Next slide. We also have our Clean Energy Fund low interest financing. And essentially that enables businesses, nonprofits, and municipalities to have low interest financing that leads to neutral, cash neutral or cash positive loans. And we have flexible terms. And this is an opportunity for you to add this onto your project where you might be getting other grant funding to sort of buy down the cost of doing an energy efficiency piece. But it'll allow you to do the rest of it to pay for the rest of the project with good terms. Next slide. So Clean Energy Fund, the financing ranges from $30,000 to $500,000 up to 10 years, 3.5% rates, or maybe 2.5% if you can use our federal funds, and rolling applications. Next slide. And basically any energy efficiency or renewable energy project we can support, and we might be able to support some items beyond energy if, for example, you need to update your roof to be able to support insulation or solar, for example. Next slide. So our energy policy, one of the strategy mentioned earlier was to ensure that CDFA's investments supported projects that are working to reduce future operating costs and improve occupant comfort and health, and improve durability of facilities. So we first developed this policy in early 2020. It was first implemented to make sure that our applicants, assess these opportunities when they're looking at, their projects they're applying for CDBG. And so the following requirements apply to all CDFA, CDBG, tax credit, and Clean Energy Fund applications. It relates to any project that proposes a physical alteration to an existing energy system. That would be like a building envelope, mechanical system, lighting, etc. Or for new construction, that would be an addition or a gut rehab. So this is an application threshold requirement. It's supposed to be done prior to application, but we will, accept and talk to you about waiver requests. So the waiver requests can be, whether you need to sort of put off the assessment for a particular reason, change the timeline, change the type of assessment that might be required, or to say, hey, this project really doesn't relate to energy at all. And you can submit those. You need to submit those before your application, and we're happy to discuss those, as early as possible. Next slide. So I won't go into every detail of the policy. You can, read through it, but essentially the requirements for the policy are that if you're doing in the top left an alteration, which is like a rehab, a retrofit, then we require for you to do a level 2 energy audit, which is a specific depth and breadth of audit if it impacts any energy related system. And we also require that you have that you've documented consultation with the appropriate utilities to make sure that there's no incentives being left on the table. So you might say, oh, we wanted to do this piece of a project or get this type of heating system, but it costs too much. We want to make sure you've spoken to the utility so that they can offer you incentives, so you might go to a higher level or get a more efficient piece of equipment, if that makes sense. Of course, you have to meet 2015 New Hampshire State Energy Code. And then we have a set of recommendations where we're just highly recommending that you go beyond code, beyond existing code, that you commission any new energy system. So commissioning is where you have a third party come in and assess that the implementation, for example, of an HVAC system was done correctly. And most people say, well, shouldn't they do that right the first time? The reality is having a third party come in, especially on a particular size system and bigger, actually has very, very fast paybacks. There's a lot of research that shows this. And also recommending high performance construction, whether you get the actual certification or not, looking to meet, LEED, Energy Star, Passive House standards or net zero. Next slide. So what I just showed you was for a retrofit. This is essentially the same thing, but for new construction, with the main difference being the type of assessment. You wouldn't necessarily do an energy audit. You might have what's called an energy design charrette, where your design team gets together, with a utility representative and someone, someone from the program, and all meet to talk about how to make the design better. And this could be at a variety of early stages in the project. And I've seen a few of these, and they can be really impactful for the project, sometimes with very little cost difference to the project itself. And the rest of the requirements are the same, except with a new construction, we'd require commissioning on any new energy system. Next slide. And thirdly, for water and wastewater projects, the type of assessment is something that we can talk about, but oftentimes you're dealing with pumping systems or a pump house, and these systems should be assessed as well for potential energy efficiency, or maybe solar might be a really good possibility at one of these, at some of these sites if you're doing wastewater especially. And so making sure you're consulting with the utilities for incentives. Next slide. So NH Saves is a combination of the utilities in the state, and they provide incentives both on the technical assistance side and the implementation side in many cases. And so I just put some slides in for them just to show that they have these resources available, and you are required to talk with them. And to show us that you've spoken with them, it would just require an example of an email back and forth. We want to make sure they're in touch, because they can do a better job of giving incentives if they know about a project early. We have a contact list for them, which we will also share with you. And really, finally, I just wanted to show that related to the energy policy, this is an example of, I'm sorry, Katie, advance one more. These are several examples of projects that have come in for our programming that have gone through the review process on the energy side to meet our energy policy. And they range, some of these projects really had an energy focus, and we're doing upgrades that had a lot to do with energy, and they already completed their level 2 audit even before they spoke to us. In some cases, they learned that they had to do the audit, and that kind of helped them decide what they should do. In this second example of Vesta Housing, they're doing a passive house design. If you're doing something to a high performance standard, we will probably pass you without requiring anything, though we still highly recommend that you do an energy design charrette. This Avesta project, you know, didn't necessarily need to do this from our point of view, but they went ahead and did it, and it was a very, very effective meeting. They changed quite a bit about the project. And in other cases, if you look to the bottom, ADA renovations, if, for example, putting a ramp outside a building, you know, that would be a waiver. It doesn't really have anything to do with energy, so it wouldn't be applicable. So we're willing to talk with you. We just ask that you contact us early in the process, submit waivers early so we can better understand how this requirement applies to your project. And next slide. So your next steps here are really to review the energy policy, which will be on the website and the materials that you have. Consider energy assessment grants through our new program or a CDBG planning grant, but potentially NHSAVE's support. On the assessment side, contact the utility and consider whether you need a waiver or not, and contact me for questions at any point in the process. So I don't know if there's anything in the chat, but that's about it. And thank you for your time.
Scott, I'm not seeing any specific questions in the chat, but I'm sure as people think through their energy needs, things will pop up. So as he mentioned, definitely don't hesitate to reach out. His contact information is right there, and we'll make sure to link you to our staff page and our follow-up email so you can see everybody's information and get in touch as it makes sense.
Thank you very much.
All right, this is Katie again, and I'm gonna walk us through the CDBG program eligibility. So hopefully your mind is churning as you're thinking about projects in your community or a project, and just want to talk about some of the sort of big picture guardrails about CDBG and how you are eligible for these funds. So first we'll discuss the national objectives, which are allowable under the federal regulation. So there's 3 national objectives. They're to provide direct benefit to low and moderate income persons or households, to aid in the prevention or elimination of slums and blight, and to eliminate a serious and immediate threat to public health and safety. This is referred to as urgent need. In New Hampshire, all projects, no matter what the national objective, must have a direct benefit to low and moderate income people of at least 51%. And we'll go into more detail about what that means in the coming slides. So in terms of national objective compliance, just, you know, showing that your project meets this, there are a number of ways to ensure that you're meeting this requirement. They include 4 different ones: area benefit, limited clientele, housing, and economic development. I'll go through each of them. Area benefit. Area benefit can be achieved in a number of ways. The benefit must be available to all residents of the project area. The project area must be primarily residential in character. At least 51% of the beneficiaries in the project area must be low and moderate income. The applicant must conduct an income survey or use census data if it coincides with the project area to establish the percentage of low and moderate income beneficiaries. The survey must be statistically valid, so you must provide the survey methodology. If you're looking for more information about how to meet the area benefit requirement, you can look in Chapter 2 of the implementation guide, starting on page 21. Another way to meet the low and moderate income beneficiary requirements is with job creation or retention. Low and moderate income job creation or retention are activities which must create permanent jobs on a full-time equivalent basis, and at least 60% of those jobs must be held by or made available to low and moderate income persons. They must meet all other requirements as set forth in the regulation. So for more information about if you have an economic development project and you're creating jobs, That's how you meet the LMI beneficiary requirements. And more information about how to do so are found in Chapter 2, starting on page 26. If you're proposing a housing project, then you're going to be providing direct benefit in your housing activities. And that could either be multifamily housing, where multifamily units require an affordable rent. The multifamily rehab must have at least 51% of the units being occupied by someone who is low and moderate income. If you're renovating a duplex, at least one of the units must be low and moderate income. Rental buildings under common ownership must be considered one structure. So if you have 3 buildings in a row and they're owned by the same owner, they must be considered a single structure. So 51% of the total number of units should be low and moderate income. If you're doing a single family housing rehab project, then 100% of the people benefiting from that project need to be low and moderate income. And if you're doing a new construction project, then at least 51% of the units that are constructed have to be low and moderate held by low and moderate income people. But new construction does have some specific requirements for how CDBG is invested in those projects. So we'd encourage you to look at the program and application guide for details and to talk about that in your pre-application meeting. Additional information about the direct benefit as part of a housing activity is available in Chapter 2 of the implementation guide starting on page 24. Was there a question about this section, Melissa?
No questions yet on this section, Katie.
Great. The last category you can apply under the direct benefit objectives is limited clientele. Under limited clientele, the activity must benefit a specific group where at least 51% of the people are low and moderate income. That can be done in 2 ways. First is to be a HUD presumed group. So if your project primarily benefits any of the HUD presumed groups listed here, abused children, elderly persons, battered spouses, homeless persons, severely disabled adults, illiterate adults, persons with AIDS, or migrant farm workers, you are not required to do income surveys. They're considered to be a presumed group. Otherwise, you're required to do a documentation of the income of the household, and you can find information about how to ensure income eligibility on page 22 of Chapter 2. So this is where you're doing an income determination of the people being served. We do have a pause here in our slides. I think I'll move right along because I hope that you all are taking a break where you need one. Unless, Melissa, you tell me that I should pause here for 5 minutes.
I think we're all set to move forward. Thank you.
All right, that's what I'm thinking. Great. So let's talk about eligible activities. So we just talked about how your project has to serve at least 51% low and moderate income persons or households, and there's 4 ways that you can prove that you're meeting that requirement. More information in Chapter 2, and Melissa did link to the resource, the implementation guide that has that information here in the chat. And now there's a number of eligible activities that you can apply for funds within. And so let's talk about those eligible activities, and yeah, let's do that now. So planning grants. The CDBG planning grant program provides up to $25,000 to really help you to determine whether your project's feasible. Not all planning grants lead to implementation projects, but we hope that they will. But we also want you to be exploring all types of projects, and we understand that this planning grant's a good tool to help you determine feasibility. Examples of eligible activities include carrying out those income surveys. that I talked about as part of proving that you meet that low and moderate income requirement. So if you're not using the census data, which is readily available on our website and obviously on the census website, then you can actually, if you have a service area that's different than the census area, then you can do an income survey with a planning grant. You could also do preliminary architectural and engineering design. You could procure cost estimates for your project. You could do a market analysis, an energy audit. Those are all things that are considered eligible activities under the planning grant. Again, planning grants are accepted on a rolling basis, and it's expected that your planning grant can be carried out within 12 months. So by the turnaround is usually 4 weeks for when you apply to when you get a decision on the funding. And then you'll go through the contracting phases we talked about earlier. And then once you have those funds available, it's expected that you can carry out that project within 12 months. More information about the planning grants can be found on Chapter 2 of the implementation guide, and then that's on page 49. Housing is an eligible activity under the CDBG program. The housing eligible activities are to provide or improve permanent residential structures which are occupied primarily by low and moderate income households. The eligible activities include the acquisition of housing units and or the rehabilitation of those units, the improvement of either ADA accessibility or improvements that address the needs of elderly persons, and new construction as long as it's in a designated area and through a community-based development organization. It's important that you consider the long-term affordability. That's a minimum of 5 years and a maximum of, to receive the maximum points in that category, you would be committing to 20 years of affordability. There's also rent restrictions. You cannot charge more than the HUD allowable rents for the units. You need to ensure that the housing units meet the housing quality standards, and there are per unit cost limitations on the investment of CDBG dollars. In terms of public facilities, so that's public facilities is to support community development projects that provide benefits to low and moderate income persons or households. There's a pretty wide variety of eligible activities. They include water and sewer project, and this is really where there's a priority project and a financial need to advance grant funds through CDFA, CDBG program for that water and sewer project. Public property improvements and public services. Water and sewer eligible activities include extending or replacing water and sewer lines, constructing water or sewer treatment facilities, constructing water storage tanks or reservoirs, constructing or replacing wells, extending or replacing water and sewer systems that serve medical facilities or nursing homes. And that last activity does require a one-to-one match. In addition, we can make investments in public property. That includes handicap accessibility to public buildings, to acquire or construct streets, sidewalks, recreational areas, or medical facilities. And any of these public property improvements under this public facility category do require a one-to-one match. And then public service. Eligible activities include acquisition, construction, and rehabilitation of community facilities. Community facilities include homeless shelters, community centers, and neighborhood facilities where public services are provided. Public services are things like mental health services, food pantries. It also includes childcare and adult daycare facilities. More information about public facilities can be found on Chapter 2, starting on page 35. I will turn this section over to our Director of Economic Development, Kevin Peterson.
Hi, everyone. Again, as with Scott, just wanted to turn on the video so we can put a face to the name and welcome. I'm going to talk about just a couple slides here, and then I'll come back with some other stuff later on. So let me turn the video off. So economic development is one of those eligible activities. And essentially the bottom line here with economic development deployment of CDBG funds is that it needs to help to create or retain good paying jobs for low and moderate income people. And some of the same qualifications for other elements of the CDBG program apply. So economic development can occur in areas where there's a majority of low and moderate income people, so 51%, and that might occur in a, where you're trying to build a public facility that's going to help increase the number of jobs that are available in that area. But more often it's related to a specific project or a specific business that is trying to expand or come into an area. So we provide grants to communities, both cities and towns, and to counties, and often those funds are sub-granted to an economic development partner like a regional development corporation, which is helping that business to secure the funding that it needs to expand or to add jobs. And some of those examples include the purchase of equipment, providing for working capital, which is just the general operations of the business. If you're acquiring or doing some rehabilitation to commercial buildings or acquiring land for a new building or new project, it can help with employee training. And it can also help with public facilities. We actually just had a grant application recently that came in where a town was improving its water supply, and as a direct result of improving its water supply, an existing business was able to add a number of new jobs. And so CDBG money was able to contribute to the overall project cost for that job creating business to expand. We also have a fairly robust technical assistance program for micro businesses, which are small businesses that have 5 or fewer employees, where one employee is the business owner. And we have 9 different partners across the state that are providing technical assistance. We invite applications in March, and we deploy that funding to support a sector that's really, really important for wealth building in New Hampshire, and a very high proportion of businesses in New Hampshire are small or micro businesses, so it's a really important piece of what we do. Again, there's a lot more information on this in Chapter 2, starting on page 51 for our regular economic development, and on page 56 for microenterprise. And if you have questions, I encourage you to reach out to me directly, and I'll try and help you figure out whether there's a good fit for CDBG for the project you have in mind. Katie? Actually, I'm going on because I didn't cover. I was going to cover the ineligible activities. There's a number of things that CDBG will not cover. You cannot cover the basic cost of operating government at either the town, city, or county level. We also can't pay for any kind of political activities or political organizing. As Katie mentioned, we cannot fund new housing construction, but there are some possibilities for that. So if you have new housing construction in mind, you want to reach out to us. We can't help with the construction of government buildings, with the exception of ADA refinements. And then we also can't cover the operating costs of public facilities or purchases of any kind of personal property for public officials. So as long as there's no expenditure of sort of general government, then you're probably going to be okay. Next slide.
All right, thanks, Kevin. So I'm now going to talk about the municipal thresholds. So just to, these are required for all applications, and CDFA has an expert in our threshold requirements, and that's Missy Lackey, and she's available to answer specific questions, but I'll review the general requirements. It's important that these thresholds are done correctly. We can be flexible on many things, but unfortunately the thresholds are a requirement that we have very little flexibility on. Most of them are statutorily required. There has to be a public notice regarding the public hearing that you're going to have about the project. So when you are planning to carry out a public, if you're planning to apply for CDBG funding, you need to have a public hearing about the project, and you need to have a public notice that provides information to the public about that meeting. The public notice needs to have the what, that's about the project, the when, that's the date and the time of the public hearing, and the where. It's also important to note that that public notice has to be published in a newspaper of general circulation and in 3 public places. And it has to be published both in the newspaper of general circulation and in the 3 public places 10 calendar days for 10 calendar days. And this does not include the date of the posting or the date of the hearing. The hearing held prior to the governance body on the hearing has to be held prior to the grantee's final action on the application. So that's before the application is submitted. When you're having that public hearing, there's requirements. The purpose of the public hearing is to inform the public about the CDBG program generally and your specific application. The public hearing minutes must be included with your application and should reflect the following: that handouts were available, that the views of the citizens were solicited, that their public feedback was requested, the amount of funds available was stated, the range of community development activities that could be supported was described, and the proposed project budget was available to review. In addition, you need to adopt by the governing body, in accordance with the public notice and hearing requirements, a housing and community development plan. The plan identifies current housing and community development needs in your community and those anticipated in the next 3 years. The plan identifies short-term and long-term objectives consistent with the national and state objectives. In the future, we're thinking of making this more of a comprehensive requirement, because at this point, this is really something that's often adopted as part of that public hearing and isn't necessarily consistent with the master plan or the regional plans, and is really a baseline threshold requirement. But we are really looking at these projects to be part of a comprehensive community development strategy. So more to come on that, but in the meantime, the minimum threshold here is to have a housing and community development plan that meets these requirements. And we do have sample documents on our website so that you can, if you're doing your first public hearing, that you have some samples of text that you could use. And again, Missy Lackey, who's our contract manager, is also our threshold expert, and she can help you with any questions you have or review any of your materials. Lastly, during your public hearing, you do have to speak on your residential anti-displacement and relocation assistance plan. It must be adopted before obligating or expending CDBG funds, and the public notice and hearing requirements apply to the adoption of this plan. Thresholds are important requirements that must be made before your applications can be consistent. It's the first thing that we review when we receive your application. And so the ways that you meet those project thresholds is that you provide a newspaper, a PDF of the original newspaper tear sheet, evidence which provides us evidence that the public hearing notice was circulated in a newspaper of general circulation. We also need the town or city council resolution, the copies of any intergovernmental agreements, if there is If this is a project that involves multiple municipalities, which is actually very rare, but if you're doing that, we need those copies. The HUD disclosure form 2880, the most recent audit of the grantee, the most recent audit of the subrecipient, a map of the proposed site, your compliance plan, which we'll talk about a little more, and your underwriting documents, which again, we'll go through in a little more detail. So the compliance plan is drafted at the time of application and submitted with your application, but it does evolve over time often as your application, as your project is ready for implementation. At this point, I'm going to turn the presentation to Alex Jetty, our compliance manager, who will just walk you through the components of your draft compliance plan, which you'll submit with your application. Alex?
Hello, everyone. I'll wait for a moment. I apologize, my voice is a little hoarse, but I will walk us through this. And I'm Alex Jetty. I'm the compliance manager, and I deal primarily with the compliance for CDBG. And, oh, slides. Okay, turn off the video. And anyway, all right, so I'm going to speak very briefly about the compliance plan, and then I'm going to talk more about the key considerations that you need to take into account when formulating a potential CDBG project. The compliance plan primarily is meant to help the grantee and potentially any grant administrator that they do hire create and maintain a comprehensive strategy to help adhere to all federal and state regulations. The plan is submitted with the application, but it is a living document, and it can be changed if there are any changes in scope to the project. So it doesn't have to be set in stone at the beginning. There are some items that are harder to change, like, for example, national objective. That's how you found eligibility to apply to the program in the first place. So we generally, do not change that one. But there are other things that can be flexible. The compliance plan is made up of several factors, as you see here, and each of these factors actually does align with a chapter of the implementation guide. Excuse me. And one of the easiest ways to help formulate your compliance plan, and I'm always here to assist, is to go through the guide and go through each section and say how you're going to adhere to the parts within that section. And if you do need any help, again, I'm more than happy to help with that piece. Moving on to the key considerations. So next slide, Katie, if you can. So let's see. So the key considerations, do you mind moving it to the next slide? I'm sorry, I don't think I can do it. Well, I will just move on because it's just key considerations anyways. So for every municipality applying for a CDBG grant, they should keep a few key areas of federal compliance in mind when considering the use of federal funds in their project. Doing so can alleviate many potential issues that could crop up throughout the implementation of that project. The main one, and you see it highlighted down here on this slide, is environmental review. For a brief overview, and I'm not going to go into explicit detail because it could take hours, the environmental review is based on the National Environmental Policies Act that was signed into law in 1970. You'll often hear people refer to it as NEPA. NEPA requires federal agencies to incorporate environmental considerations in their planning and decision-making through a systematic interdisciplinary approach. This requirement is passed down to anyone that has or could potentially receive federal funds from the state of New Hampshire. So what does this mean? It essentially means that every project, big or small, needs to keep the environmental review process in mind while planning their project, even from inception. Many CDBG projects do not incorporate activities that could potentially alter the environment. This doesn't mean that they're exempt from following the process, because there are 5 different levels of environmental review, and each project will fall into one of those categories. There's an important thing to note. Each level of environmental review requires that the authorized official, or they can designate someone through a process, of that municipality that applies to sign off on the determination. The municipality is considered something called the responsible entity. This differs from other federal funding sources in the state of New Hampshire. So it's important to keep that in mind. If the environmental determination is not signed off by the authorized official, or AO, it is not considered valid. So even if, as we go on, your project is considered exempt and if you don't have the environmental exempt form signed off by the AO, the project is not compliant. So for a brief overview of the levels, this is important to keep in your mind while you're planning your project, because every one of the projects that you might have or proposing or might be thinking about applying us to will fall into one of these categories. For one, the first level is exempt. All CDBG applicants are required to submit an exempt form with their application. This exempt form allows the project to perform basic administrative and sometimes minor project activities up to a certain monetary limit. Additionally, some projects are considered exempt by their very nature. Many technical assistance projects would fall into this category. A project is welcome to submit this exemption with their application and be done with the entire process right off the bat. The next category is categorically excluded, not subject to, and that's not subject to the CDBG NEPA regulations. This is a catch-all category for a project that does not rise to the next levels of environmental review. Most of your economic development projects are probably going to fall into this category. The next level is categorically excluded, subject to. Any project that rises to this level of review must also complete the statutory checklist. It's a long checklist that goes through the levels included in NEPA. This checklist goes through all the levels of compliance the project must adhere to, ensures that there's no additional consultation or mitigation that is required with one or more of federal or state entities. Many housing rehab projects fit into this category. And if no mitigation is required, the project converts to exempt and can proceed. If any mitigation is required, so if you do have to work with historic, for example, the project cannot convert to exempt and must follow the request for release of funds process to receive the authority to use grant funds from CDFA. There's the next level of review. This is environmental assessment. Any project that cannot fall into any of the other categories will receive an environmental assessment. It is important to note that environmental assessment is not necessarily a phase 1 environmental, though they often can go hand in hand. Projects that fall into this category are major rehab projects, demolition, and projects along those lines. Basically anything that could potentially have an impact on the environment. If a municipality is undergoing a project of this magnitude, it is recommended that they seek the services of a professional environmental engineer. And this project will most definitely require a full request for release of funds process and a sign off by a CDFA. And that process involves there's time that's linked with that process. It's generally about a month or more. There's one final level of environmental review, and I'm only mentioning it just so we're aware of it. It's called the environmental impact statement. And the likelihood that a project will reach this level and still utilize federal funding is very small. But this is any activity that will result in a significant impact on the environment. If you have a project that reaches this level, please contact us right away, and we can actually work through the feasibility of using our funds at all. There's one final thing to keep in mind about the environmental reviews process. It's something called choice limiting actions. The implementation guide will go into this in significant detail, but please keep these in mind while you're planning your project. Do not perform any project-based activities until your environmental review process is completed. Do not spend money, federal or otherwise. Do not go out to bid. Basically don't do anything. Doesn't matter if your project is exempt or category excluded, subject to. Complete the environmental process. CDFA accepts environmental determinations prior to the submission of an application. We can perform many of the processes beforehand to ensure that a project can proceed on schedule. Just keep in mind, if you receive the go-ahead before approval from governor and council, you are proceeding at your own risk. The There's two more that I'd like everybody to keep in mind, and that's procurement. Procurement funded in whole or part with CDBG funds must comply with the applicable federal requirements in 2 CFR 200. This is an important distinction. If you're procuring a construction manager that CDBG funds are not going to pay for, you don't have to worry about it. You can procure your construction manager at any time. If the subrecipient that is going to complete the activity is a for-profit, they're only required to adhere to certain levels of 2 CFR 200, but not the methods of procurement outlined in 2 CFR 200-320. And that's, following the basic levels of procurement, like small purchases or going out to bid, utilizing newspaper postings. Again, the implementation guide goes into this in much deeper detail. And as always, I'm here as a resource to talk to you about. One final thing to keep in mind are grantee requirements. I'd like to remind all the grantees that these are your grants. You're applying to CDFA for CDBG funds. If your project incorporates a subrecipient, like many New Hampshire projects do, the responsibility for federal compliance for the entirety of the project still rests on your shoulders. Therefore, a lot of New Hampshire municipalities will choose to work with a grant administrator that's experienced with CDBG to ensure that their project is on track, especially if they're working with a subrecipient. But even if they're not, you can still procure or work with the local planning commission in those circumstances as well. At this time, I think that's about all the key considerations that I'll go through. There are multiple other levels of federal compliance. If you have any questions about any of them, we can please email me and I'm happy to help. And I will pass it back.
Thank you so much, Alex. Melissa, are there any questions for Alex?
No current questions on compliance, but I'm sure they'll pop up as applicants dig in.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also provide an implementation workshop. So really at this point, we're just wanting you to get a sense of those requirements so that you're able to complete the compliance plan and also ensure that the initial steps you're taking are consistent with the requirements. But we look to provide you much more significant information on implementation at implementation workshops. And again, Alex is a great resource. So if you have questions, please reach out to her. We talked a little bit about when you apply for funds so you submit your application through the grants management system, and then CDFA evaluates your application and we score it. So the next two sections are talking about two of our processes. The first is we need to ensure that, one, you have the financial capacity to carry out the project, and that the federal funds are required. That's one of the things HUD asks us to do, is just to ensure through our financial underwriting that the funds are necessary and that you have the capacity to carry out the project. So Kevin's going to go through the financial documents that we require and our process of review, and then we'll jump into the community progress indicators, which is a resource for you as you think about applications. And then we'll go into that scoring, really break down the scoring categories and ensure that you understand how your project will be scored once it comes into CDFA. So at this point, I will pass it on to Kevin, who will outline the financial underwriting documentation requirements.
Thanks, Katie. And this is a pretty consistent list of information that we require across all CDFA programs, and it helps us to understand the financial capacity of the applying organization, and in the CDBG program, the subrecipient. First of all, we need to know the start and end date of your fiscal year so that we can understand how the project fits into your budgeting and financial management. Some organizations have a calendar year fiscal year. Some of them have a different one. Often it's June 1 through July 30th, but we've seen many other start and end dates as well. So there's a space in the application for you to spell that out. Each organization requesting funds submits several operating budgets for the entire organization, not just for the project itself. And again, depending on whether this is a city or town, with or without a subrecipient, there will be places for information for both the applicant, which is the unit of local government, and the subrecipient, which likely would be carrying out the project. So a budget for the current fiscal year and the budget to annual report for the most recent completed fiscal year, showing what you budgeted in major income and expense categories and the actual performance. So we can see how you did. Every nonprofit organization is required by the state, if they have an operating budget of $25,000 or more, to submit an annual report to the Secretary of State's office. And that annual report must include some sort of financial statement. Our requirements mirror the state requirements. So if your organization has an operating budget of more than $1 million, you submit your most recent completed audited financial statement, which is completed by an independent CPA firm or outside audit firm. If your organization has an operating budget between $500,000 and $1 million, you submit at least a review financial statement, if not the audit. And if your organization has a smaller operating budget below $500,000, you submit your IRS Form 990. And again, these are documents that you should be preparing on an annual basis for the state anyway. Finally, if your organization is going to have some current year financials, usually prepared by management, a balance sheet, the profit and loss, which is basically your performance against the operating budget, and a cash flow statement that helps us understand how you're doing in the current fiscal year. Next slide, please. There are a couple other pieces to the financial puzzle. We do give you the opportunity to submit what's called a financial status overview. It's sort of a narrative that allows you to provide some description of what might be going on behind the numbers. For example, a subrecipient may have a planned deficit in your operating budget to enable you to buy a new computer system, and then you're going to be raising funds over time to cover that cost. Or there might be a particularly large bequest that came in at 1 year and ballooned your income in a way that looks odd on the face of it, but with the explanation, it helps us to understand more about your financial circumstance. It's helpful to know about several other financial tools that we encourage nonprofits to consider deploying. One is an operating reserve, which is a buffer of cash or other kind of liquid assets that you could tap into in a special circumstance. You know, we just experienced that over the last several months with the COVID-19 pandemic. An endowment is another tool that helps you generate annual operating revenue and provide a way for donors to create a legacy to support your organization. And then a line of credit is also a great tool to manage cash flow and to establish a positive working relationship with a bank or credit union in your area. These financial tools are not required, but if you have them, we ask you to describe how you use them. And again, it gives us a little better way to understand your organization's financial health. Katie?
Great, thank you, Kevin. So I'm going to go on to the evaluation and scoring of applications. So the first action that we'll take when we receive your application is really to review your application against those threshold requirements. So if we have any questions about those thresholds, we need clarification, or want you to explain something, that's what you'll be hearing from us about first. After that, we're really going to look at these general evaluation criteria. Does your project meet a CDBG national objective and an eligible activity? As Kevin alluded to in our financial underwriting, do you have the capacity and the history in your performance to carry out this grant? This includes the sufficiency of the subrecipient, financial or otherwise, to carry out the proposed project. And are there enough resources committed to this project to carry it out? And then in any specific program area, there may be a requirement for a one-to-one match or other requirements, and we'll ensure that those are being met as well. So that's the first, after the thresholds, these evaluation criteria are used. Next, we're going to provide a score for your project against our community progress indicators. And these indicators, 13 of them, and Kevin will talk about them briefly, make up an index. And that's the first, that index score is the first score that we give your project. Kevin?
So we're increasing our capacity to collect and share data that are specific to to individual communities. We have assembled this set of community indicators that actually helps to document those needs and issues using reliable, accessible, and updatable data from a variety of sources. And these indicators fall into three big categories, as you can see: basic human needs, access to opportunity, and community sustainability and vibrancy. We work pretty closely with the Fiscal Policy Institute to assemble the data, which comes from the Census Bureau, from New Hampshire Employment Security, from New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, and many others. And the data sets deal with specific topics such as poverty, population, or access to healthcare. Next slide. We're going to be releasing a set of updated community indicators on our website a little later this month. So we've gathered data over the last several months, and those indicators will reflect the most recent information that we have and will apply to projects for 2021. And you can download a spreadsheet that has the individual indicator number and the range for that particular, for your community or for a county or for adjacent communities. So that helps you to learn more about some of the issues and challenges and strengths that your community is experiencing. And over time, we hope to be able to add more data to our website. Katie specifically mentioned the Core Data Index. These indicators are mashed together to contribute to the CDBG scoring system. So the Core Data Index takes all 13 of these indicators and creates a relative measure of poverty and other socioeconomic challenges. And it replaces an old system that we used called the set factors that were in place until a year ago. And that information was based in the 2010 census. So each year, the data was getting a little more stale. So the Core Data Index mirrors that set factor score, which was 0 to 70. And so a town with a higher number, closer to 70, has a greater amalgam of socioeconomic challenges: higher poverty rates, more utilization of SNAP or food stamp programs, issues like that from the previous page. So we will be publishing a Core Data Index for all New Hampshire municipalities and counties every December, and that'll be coming out soon. And that Core Data Index will contribute to the scoring system for all CDBG grants in calendar year 2021. Next slide, Katie.
Great, thanks. So after that, using the score from the Core Data Index, up to 70 points. The next area that we look at when scoring projects is project need. So it's up to 50 points. 50 points is awarded to one application in the round in each category. So one public facility project and one housing project in comparison to other projects in the round will receive 50 points. And all other projects will receive either 40 points for demonstration of substantial need, 25 points for demonstration of moderate need, 10 points for demonstration of minimal need, or 0 points for demonstration of no need. We rarely see projects that demonstrate minimal or no need. Next, we'll look at up to 50 points based on the percentage of low and moderate income persons or households residing in the target area or service area at the time of application. These people may or may not benefit directly from the project, but it is points that are awarded to this particular project. The points are awarded based on the LMI percentage in the project area. So say the low and moderate income, the number of low and moderate income people in the project area are 47. It's 47 minus 10. So that's how the category of scoring was written. So it would be 37 points in this area. If the project area is 70% LMI, minus 10 would be 60, obviously, but no score in this category can exceed 50. So the top score in this category is 50, regardless of whether the number is 60 or above. The next is project impact, and there's a number of areas in project impact. They include the direct benefit, so the percentage of the funds requested that will provide a direct benefit to low and moderate income people. or households. The match funding, so this is the ratio of firmly committed match funds above any required threshold levels to the total amount of CDBG funds requested. The greater the amount of leveraged funds, the more points the project receives. And then we're looking at activity priority. So the CDBG program, the state policies prioritize activities in 3 categories: high priority, medium priority, and low. Examples of high priority activities include all eligible housing activities, most municipal infrastructure, those are water and sewer projects, homeless shelters, childcare facilities. So those are all examples of high priority activities. The next category of scoring is the centers and neighborhood category. This is whether it's 0, 5, or 10 points based on the degree in which the project helps to preserve the population center or the neighborhood. The next is the cost per beneficiary. The lower the project cost per beneficiary served, the higher the point scores in this category. And this is in comparison to other projects in the round. So the cost per beneficiary is calculated for each project in the public facilities round, and then they are provided a score, and then each project in the housing round, and they're provided a score relative to the other applications. Long-term benefit, the minimum benefit for public facility and housing projects is 5 years, and the maximum points is if you're proposing a project with a 20-year benefit. And finally, readiness for implementation. The more that you can provide evidence that your project is ready to be implemented when the grant funds are received, the higher score you'll receive in that readiness for implementation category. So that concludes the scoring categories for the public facilities and housing projects. Again, there's 3 major categories: the core data index, the area need, and then the project impact. The scoring of planning grants is a little bit different. It's on a 32-point scoring system, and it's based on these, some of the same criteria as the housing and public facilities, and some that are a little different. So again, community indicators, long-term benefit of the proposed project that's being studied, matching funds, the award history, the innovation of the study, the implementation plan, whether it's meeting special need populations, and the project's needs for funds. On the planning grants, it's in our intention to support the planning efforts of all projects, and it's very unlikely that if the planning grant is eligible that it wouldn't be funded. So this scoring is really just to determine the level of each of these areas and ensure a thorough evaluation, but there's not a minimum score that applications need to meet. So again, on the housing and public facilities, we've got 3 categories. The community progress indicators, that's up to 70 point. The project need or area need is 150 in each category. And then the project impact, we went through the 8 or so categories in that, and that is 240 points total. So the total amount of funding that, or of points that a project can get is 410, but usually projects are in the high 200s, low 300s in any given round. So the scoring criteria for economic development are pretty similar. We'll just buzz through those really quickly. They include the community progress indicators, like just like the public facilities, up to 70 points. We're looking at other economic factors. Those are other data points about a community related to high school dropout rates and some other factors. Again, data-based factors are evaluated there, and it's not something that your application can really change. And then we're looking at the project impact, so the effect of employment, and a significant amount of the scoring of an economic development application is on the employee benefits. Those are the benefits that an employee receives when they become a full-time employee at the jobs that were created based on the CDBG investment. And finally, the benefit to the business and other public benefits. And there is a minimum score to receive an economic development award. So these applications are accepted on a rolling basis. An infrastructure in support of economic development project like the Peterborough project that Kevin described, and projects that are sponsored by a nonprofit need to receive 250 points, and all other projects need to receive 265. So
before we wrap up with the timeline, can we answer a few questions about scoring?
yes, please.
Okay, great. So we have a question in the chat about whether other point categories in the need category for housing and public facilities are exclusive. So can only one project score 40, only one project score 30, etc.
Only the need category, the balance of categories, projects can, multiple projects can score the same score.
We had received a couple of questions.
Sorry, just on the cost per beneficiary, it's really evaluated projects in the round are evaluated against each other or in comparison to each other. So if there's usually ranges, so if a project is in the similar range to another project in terms of cost per beneficiary, then they'll receive the same score.
And,
go ahead. Sorry, Melissa, go ahead.
no worries. A question in advance about are there any anticipated changes to the scoring system for January 2021 application round? If you could just clarify that.
Yeah, nope, there will be no changes to the scoring in the January 2021 application round. So you can see the detail of all those scoring categories that I just went through really quickly in our application and program guide. It's I think the appendix of that application and program guide. It will give you the detail. There's no changes. Our grantees, as well as our Community Development Advisory Committee, have discussed some modernization of the scoring, but that would be contemplated over the winter, and we'd seek public input on that process, and those would be put in place for the July 2021 round. So there'll be no changes for the January 2021 scoring.
Great, thank you. And I think the balance of questions that were submitted in advance had been answered in some way, shape, or form through the presentation. But if we've missed any and you have specific follow-ups, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And Katie, I'll let you close with that final slide.
All right, so I just want to thank you for spending your afternoon with us. I know this is a lot of information, and it's hard to really engage in this virtual format some. So I really appreciate you spending your time learning about the CDBG program, and really hope that we can engage with you further about your projects. The applications that we hope are being worked on now will be submitted through the grants management system by January 25th, 2021, no later than 4 o'clock. We like to say, and it's actually just gives you some perspective. The grants management system is a system in which we open up for applications, and then at 4 o'clock it sort of closes the doors and accepts all the applications that have been submitted. So just pretend that the grants management system clock is 10 minutes faster than yours, because it might be 1 or 2 minutes faster than yours, and we'd hate to have somebody working on their application and then not have it submitted. So just encouraging you to get that application submitted in advance of the deadline, which is January 25th at 4 o'clock. We'll then work with the applicants but over the next 2 months, February and March, to review the thresholds, evaluate applications and score them, do virtual site visits, and then do that final scoring. We will provide a time and a deadline for you to submit additional information if we need it to complete our scoring or our evaluation of the application. And when we receive your application, if we need additional information, we'll let all applicants know what that deadline is. We'll then recommend for funding to the Community Development Advisory Committee a set of projects based on scores. And those will go to the meeting on April 1st, 2021. The application round will be managed by Molly Kaler. our Director of Housing and Community Development with support from the balance of the CDFA staff. So if you have any questions, please reach out to Molly. I think this was our last slide. So this is, so again, the grants management system is the way we take applications, and here's a link to that grants management system. If you are not currently registered, you will have to register for an account. And we look forward to working with you on your upcoming application. I'll just pause here and we'll keep this open in case people have any lingering questions.